Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Mr. Speaker, first I would just like to acknowledge both of the speakers that spoke before me and their thoughtful words here today. I stand here again with a heavy heart, a heaviness that has become all too familiar, Mr. Speaker, a burden that unfortunately has not been relieved from repeat performances in this chamber. Today is October the 4th. It's the National Day of Action for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, 2SLGBTQQIA plus peoples. One of the reasons why I took a few minutes to disrupt what normally is just a process that happens in this place with no questions was because I knew that in a few minutes I was going to be standing up and talking about this National Day of Action in recognition of the fact that this is one of those opportunities, this is one of those subject matters that could benefit very well from having an all-party approach to addressing the more than 200 calls to action from this report and the many other reports that have instructed Crown governments on how to act going forward. As we hear in this place today, all-party support for action. Yet what is missing are the tables for all parties to come together and to do the work. I don't stand to raise that as a way to put a mark on any one government. I simply stand to raise it to say that if we are going to work together, then it needs to be more than just in the words that we say, the words that we put on Hansard. It needs to be in the actions of our work. And so it's an invitation to put us around the table together so we can do meaningful work, working away on the many actions. It's not the burden that need to be carried by our Minister of Indigenous Relations. It's not the burden that need only be carried by the current Premier. This, as my mother continues to remind me, is 170 years plus in the making in this province, and it is going to take many years into our future, many premiers, many ministers of Indigenous relations. And what Indigenous people need to see, I believe, my opinion, is this Legislative Assembly truly working together so that the politics of this place does not and need not disrupt the work that we necessarily do on behalf of all British Columbians. I stood last year and brought a critique to what I felt was a rather tepid response from this province with respect to the action plan that was announced. $5.5 million for an issue that, as has been pointed out, impacts communities right across our province, to address the safety of our matriarchs, of our grandmothers, of our mothers, aunties, sisters, daughters, cousins, and nieces, is not good enough, Mr. Speaker. This is not a small problem, as we've heard, that we're facing. There are hundreds, thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so our response needs to match the size of the problem that we face. Unfortunately, this institution has shown Indigenous people, and for the entire history, the work that we've done here is but a very small history here, that the lives of Indigenous women and girls mean less It's a terrible thing to say, that they're worth less. And when we address the people that the Minister of Indigenous Relations has highlighted, I came here prepared today to talk about Chelsea Poorman. She was reported missing in September the 7th, 2020. And yet it took the Vancouver Police Department 10 days after her parents noted her missing to make a public notice. 10 days. I have to ask the question, if Chelsea was anybody else, would the authorities have been so slow to act? That's the feeling that we have in our communities. The terrible reality. Her body was found this past April in the backyard of a mansion in Vancouver's Shaughnessy neighborhood. 2 weeks later, Chelsea's next of kin were notified. At the time of publication, the Vancouver police spokesperson spoke about all the aspects of the case that they did not know about, including the cause of death. And yet they were able to boldly pronounce that Chelsea's death, the circumstances surrounding it, were not suspicious. They knew nothing really about what happened, except they did know that what happened wasn't suspicious, the circumstances surrounding it. However, Mr. Speaker, it gets worse than this, because even though they determined that there was no foul play, despite not knowing how Chelsea died, the police continued to investigate. But how are we supposed to have confidence, Mr. Speaker? How is Chelsea's family and Indigenous communities across this province supposed to have any confidence when, even though they found the information contrary, even if they found information that was contrary to their public announcements, that information would see the light of day? That police department had already invested. Were already invested in the fact that there was nothing suspicious about this situation. Nothing suspicious about the remains of a disabled Indigenous woman found in the backyard of one of Canada's wealthiest neighborhoods. This brings me to another person that I want to talk about, another Indigenous woman, Noelle Osoup. I have children who are the same age as this young Indigenous woman. I have nieces and cousins the same age as Noelle, 14 years old when she passed away. It's hard to comprehend, Mr. Speaker, how our child welfare system can continue to fail Indigenous children, my relatives, and our babies, as they have. Noelle ran away from a provincial group home when she was 13 years old, and her body was found, Mr. Speaker, in a tiny apartment in downtown Eastside, Vancouver. In February, officials removed the remains of the tenant, Van Chung Pham, a man found to be a threat to the public and particularly to vulnerable women. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't until 2 months later that officials returned and found the remains of Noelle and another woman. And after seeing pictures of Pham's apartment, it is mind-boggling to imagine that there were remains of 2 other human beings in that space that were not seen or found at that initial investigation. Chelsea and Noelle were not failed years ago. This all happened in the last year since the last time I stood to talk about the National Day of Action. The most recent information regarding Noelle's case was published yesterday. We wear orange shirts, we display red dresses, we deliver eloquent performances to signal our support, but yet our institutions continue to fail the virtues that we claim to uphold. So here we are on this National Day of Action, pleading for more than a performance, pleading for this assembly, from our police services and all our institutions to treat this situation with the urgency that you would if this was your matriarch, if this was your grandmother, mother, auntie, sister, daughter, cousin, and niece. High school.